So what we've done is we've removed the top assembly from the car and laid it on a table. We're straddling a small table and we're going to begin the bow wrapping process. Just a couple differences if you're having trouble identifying the year of your car and what top assembly you have. 1923 was the first year that the top assembly would attach to the windshield post. Prior to that, in 22, they would have a strap that would come from the frame and attach to a little clamp on the windshield post. So that would be one identifying factor. You could have a very late 22 because they came into play in 23. Some of the very late 22s may have gotten this assembly. And it is called a one-man top. Supposedly one person can put this top up and down. So we will start bow wrapping, and I'm beginning with the front bow, which we wrap in top material. And my rule of thumb is if it's a layer that's going to be covered, I'm okay using staples. If it was going to be a layer that might show in the process of putting the top up or down, then I'm going to use tacks. And so this is covered in top material with the finished side out, because the bottom edge of this bow will show when the top is up. And we're also going to wrap the corners with the bow or the top material. To begin the corner bow wrap, I've run it in a straight line, and you can see I gave it a few slits to allow the fabric to separate and fan out around that curvature. And then I've cut it off flush with the bracket, and I'm ending it right before this bracket that's installed. Oops, if you can see it. Where are you? There, for the side curtain. So I'm going to leave those in place and just butt my bow wrap up to that fastener. And then what I've done is I've trimmed away the excess. I've wrapped it around, and I'm just barely going to overlap or butt the two pieces together here, because we don't want a lot of bulk building up on this curvature. But just for handling, I've cut it down and I've given some slits. If you can see the slits here that I've cut. That way it's going to allow this fabric to fan out and for me to pull it as smooth as possible around this curvature. This piece of material is cut on the bias, so it should be able to take shape. Okay, for beginning wrapping the last 3 bows in the bias cut denim cloth, I like to start out with a little spray glue, and today I'm using Pro Stick high strength spray adhesive. Any spray foam or spray glue that is meant for fabric can be used. You don't want something that's going to bleed through the materials. What I've done is very lightly sprayed the bow, very lightly sprayed the front third of my bow wrap. That way I can start placing the bow wrap on the bow without having to nail it. If I need to adjust it, I just peel it and re-stick it. I can show you, it's hard to do this. See how you can stick it on, and if you didn't get it straight, you just peel it off and you can re-stick it again. Once I'm happy with where I have the bow wrap, that's when I'll start putting my staples or nails in. So I'm going to start, and I'll take another picture once I get the first layer done. What I'm going to do is basically just try and run this as straight as I can, really without stretching it, and press it on, and then we'll begin wrapping it around the bow. I've got my piece pressed on, and you can see I've just run it along the bow straight as I can, and I mentioned without stretching it. You're going to do all the stretching once you wrap it around. And what I'm going to do, since this is a fabric that will ravel, I'm folding under a 1/2 inch right above the iron casing. So that's going to butt right up to that iron casing. And again, we're going to bring the fabric around, and especially in the corner area, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to make slits. So we're just going to take and cut the fabric like this. And we can cut that right up to this back edge. You don't want to cut beyond it because then your slit would show. But you can cut the area. We could cut this all the way back to here if necessary, so that we get all the wrinkles out around that curvature. To begin wrapping, I've made a slit at the end of the straight part of the bow, and down here will come again to about the same point. And what we're going to do is cut back our bow wrap so that we can see how that's barely reaching the front edge. I'm going to fold under, and then we're going to nail that so that it gives a nice finished edge and you won't have it raveling. So we're doing that on the straight section of the bow from this point to this point, and we've trimmed down our bow wrap so that we don't have a whole lot of bulk there. You want to just turn under a 1/2 inch and get the straight edge all finished. Okay, to review wrapping the bows, we put top material on our front bow and we've stapled that. We did the curvature also. Remember to make little slits so that your bow wrap can fan out and allow you to get that as smooth as possible. You can see it on this one a little bit better how it's slit so that it allows the fabric to spread out and really cling to that curvature. And then the second bow, we've nailed through the center straight section, folding that under so you don't have any loose threads peeking out. And then over the curvature area, this metal area, we hand sewed, and then I've stapled here because our pad will be attached here. And at the end, we're folding up a 1/2 inch and putting a nail there. And same with the rear bow. We're just finishing that up with some hand sewing over that metal bracket. The rear bow, we went ahead and used staples across the whole bow because your main top deck and your rear curtain will be nailed on here. So like I said earlier, I don't worry about using nails until it's the final layer on that part. I get away with staples if I know I'm going to be adding another layer of materials on top, and it's the final layer that I like to use the nails. So now we have our bows wrapped and the assembly is back on the car. It looks pretty sad right now because we don't have any straps on. What I've done, just for safekeeping, I tied some twine to hold that bracket in its keeper on both sides. Just until we stabilize this frame, I'm trying to avoid anything popping out of place and falling down and scratching the body. But this is a starting point. We've got bows wrapped, we've got it attached to the front windshield. I've got my rear bow tied up to my garage door opener, and that just serves as an extra hand until I get some straps attached. As soon as our straps are on, then our assembly will take shape and be solid. So before straps go on, our windshield flap needs to go on. So we've got our front bow securely attached to the frame. And we're going to take our windshield flap, which is the piece that's a long rectangle with the 2 snaps on each end. And we're basically going to put it over the windshield and lay it forward over the bow and nail that in place. So we're doing this from standing inside the car. I'm standing beside the steering wheel, and I've laid my windshield flap over the windshield, and we've got the notch cut out for the wiper, so that just lays right over the wiper, so that little flap is straddling the windshield. I don't know if you can see this, but we've got that laid on. Then we're going to just fold the flap forward and roll it over the front of the bow. And it's okay to leave a little play in here. That's okay to leave a little bit of fullness in this area, because you want that flap to reach back nicely to the windshield. When the wind is blowing, it presses it against the windshield. And roll that over the front of the bow, and we're going to nail across the whole front edge. This is an area where I see people do this wrong, and they end up with their windshield flap hanging way down low. So you want to remember to put the windshield between the two flaps, have it come over the top of the bow, and roll down the face side. Leave a little bit of slack in here so that when the wind is blowing, it's going to blow that tight towards the windshield. Okay, I've just got a few staples going across the front of the windshield flap. This is what I'm talking about. You want to make sure that the corner of this flap reaches back to the windshield, so that we're not stapled too far out and then we'll have this falling down in front of the windshield. You want to leave enough slack so that you're sure this flap will always stay over the windshield. We have attached our windshield flap. We've left a little bit of play here. We want that to reach all the way to the windshield. Wrapped around, we're keeping all of this nailing up in the upper half of this bow. We don't want to crowd the bottom half. That's where our final main top deck and trim will get nailed. So we're trying to keep all of this stapling up in the upper half. Then I've attached the straps. I found center and measured out 12 inches, and then the strap goes on the outside of that 12-inch mark. And I've stapled it, and I'm going to reinforce it with some nails. This is where your tack hammer with the magnetic end comes in handy, because usually you're holding and nailing at the same time. Your nail is on the hammer, you can set it in, spin your hammer around and finish tacking it. Okay, we've got our long straps in place, and we've got our short straps in place. We measured out from center 12 inches and put the long straps out on either side of that mark, on the outside of that mark. And then I measured about 6 inches out. The main thing I wanted to do was measure from the center out 22 inches so that when I put my rear curtain on, my rear curtain seam will be covered by this short strap. And I also measured from center out 18 inches. So we're barely covering on the inside for the 18, and we're barely reaching on the outside for the 22. So our seam should be covered within that short strap. And things are tight. I measured from the tack rail here up to the bottom edge of the bow, and my measurement came out to be 23 inches. And so I made sure that was equal on both sides. And since I'm happy with my placement, everything is nice and tight. This bow is tight, this strap is tight. Then I went ahead and trimmed or nailed. I sunk nails in there, both straps, and then I trimmed it off. If I do need to do any adjusting from here on out, I'm going to do it at this point, at the tack rail. And I can easily take those staples out and pull things tighter if I need to. So as I am sure things are staying where they belong, that's when I put the reinforcement nails in. We are on to putting the pad sets on, and the way we begin is with just the cloth wrapping. This is a triple folded cover. So we open that up and we attach it at the front bow and at the rear bow. Just the black lining first. If you can see that black fabric that is the casing for the pad. You want to nail that first, and a good anchor point would be at the second bow forward, has a notch, and you want to bring that pad set right up flush with the notch. And then once we have those parts in place, we start layering the burlap in. And here's a better picture of that notch. That's with a pad that's already finished. So you want to get the cloth on first, and you want to make sure from the inside, you want to be checking from the inside of the car that there aren't any wrinkles up in here, because if they're there now, you won't get rid of them later. And then once you have that covering in place, then you start with the straps. And I like to anchor my strap at this second bow from the rear, because there's a notch in the framework. I want my pad to be right up to that notch, so that is what I call my starting point. And then we run that forward and back tight, but not tighter than our strap. Sometimes it's easy to pull tight on these and then you end up with sagging straps. So make sure you're matching the tension that you have already established with your strap. This third bow from the back I am not nailing to, but you can see the strap wants to fall off. So what I'm going to do is take a needle and thread and just whip stitch that together to keep it from falling down like that. You can see I'm just knotting the thread, and then I'm going to pull that together with several stitches and knot it again. So now we have our straps in place all the way back. I am going to trim them as close to my staples as possible, and I'm also going to set a few nails in because they are supportive to the structure of the roof. So I've got my nail on my hammer, and we're just going to set a few, 3 or 4 of them across each strap for reinforcement. We don't want to rely on anything that's giving the top structural integrity. We want this to be load bearing, and that means we're going to stick some nails in it. Okay, so we have trimmed the back edge of our lining material and straps. I've left the fold over layers long, so I just trimmed the center section. Coming forward, we've nailed with the number 6 tacks right to this bowl. That's going to hold our straps in place. We want nails there. Staples could get popped out during the stress of the top going up and down. Notice we're nailing through the straps. We will not nail through the pad. We don't want any indentation in the padding once that's on. And then at the third bow from the back, we just hand stitched to keep the straps together. Otherwise this one wanted to just fall down. And then up front we have trimmed again the center section and nailed our straps. And all that nailing is above the center line of this. Now we have layered our pad on top of the straps, and I've lightly glued the straps and I've lightly glued the pad. And we're making sure that pad runs right within a 1/4 of an inch to that sewn edge of the pad wrap. And same down below. We want that to come down so that it's filling out the entire width of the pad. Then we're going to trim. The bottom 2 layers get trimmed ahead of the bow, and this final layer will wrap over the bow about 1/2 inch. Okay, I've trimmed that away. This layer is stopping right ahead of the edge of the bow, and then the final layer that will be against the main top is coming back within 1/2 inch of that back edge. We'll staple this here, but we want to leave this area clear for our final main top deck and our trim, our rear curtain, our valance. Okay, we're beginning day 2 of installing a top on a 23 to 25 touring, and I like to pre-fit the rear curtain. That's the next step after you've got the straps, bows wrapped, straps, pads, and windshield flap on, and our structure is nice and sound. Everything is lined up where it should be. So what I like to do to start off with the rear curtain is find center of the rear bow, find center of the rear curtain, and just hold it up there with a clamp. Now, when I first put it up there, I put it as low as it could possibly be. And then as I started to fit the curtain around the sides, I continued to adjust that clamp. Find center on top, center on bottom. On this particular model, we have seams that should line up with the body seam, and ours are lining up perfectly here and here. So once I tested, I brought my side panel around and clamped it here. You want to leave some fullness right here in this curve of the rear bow. If I stretch this super tight, I'll have this hip sticking out here. And I've left some play in this curtain so that when I'm doing my final stretching, I have enough material to stretch it up and over that bow, and it'll just make a nice curve to that side panel. So once I was happy with how things were fitting here, the next thing was to test where our bow leg curtains lined up. And when we send this to you, there are no holes punched in this curtain. You need to line them up with fasteners in your bow leg. So my trick is to just hold them with clamps first. Once I have an idea that my curtain is fitting fine, and now bear in mind I have a clamp here in the center, 1 staple on the seam, 1 staple on the seam, 1 staple up above, same on that side. So when I take this down to set my fasteners in, I've only got 4 staples to remove, and the rest I've held with clamps. And then what I do is I work my way down the curtain. Starting up here, I want to make sure I've got a good fit. My curtain is ending where my welt tip is going to be applied. And then I press against the stud that's in the bow, and I just put my little scratch-awl right up against that stud and poke through the curtain with the scratch-awl. So I'm making a very minimal hole, and I work my way down the bow leg, putting a hole at each stud. And as you can see, you end up with just a very small hole. So if I needed to adjust up or down when I go to putting the fastener in, I haven't ruined the side panel. That hole gives me leeway to move my fastener up or down. So slow as you go. Take this rear curtain very seriously. You don't want to just get up there and start nailing. You should be able to basically fit your whole curtain and have a nice tight curtain before you start nailing. Another point is around this curvature, we've left it long in case your bow was set higher, further out. You can see there's a couple inches of play down here at the bottom. When I'm fairly certain I had my curtain in the right spot, I started making slits. Okay, we're on the workbench here. We're going to install the lift-a-dot fastener. And what I did, this is your punch. And the two teeth that are closest together is the front of the fastener. So I've centered the hole of the punch right over the hole I made in the curtain and made sure those two teeth that are close together are facing the edge of the curtain. And then we punched our hole. Then our finished side of the fastener should be to the inside of the curtain. That's the side you will see when you're inside the car. And you poke those prongs through, and you can see the hole is just where the stud will come through. So it worked out nicely that we used the scratch awl to get started. So set each fastener in and then flip it, and gently you put your plate on, and you're just going to tap those tabs over. I don't know if I can do this. See, that tab gets pounded over and holds the plate in place. Pretty easy to install. If you don't have this punch, you can use just a round hole punch and then use your utility knife just to make slits in the curtain where those fastener studs would come through. And the way I would do that is just make an impression on the cover with the fastener and then take my knife, just the point of your knife, and poke through. So if you're lacking the fastener punch, go ahead and modify by using just a round hole punch and the tip of your blade. So we've got our holes punched. Now I know it seems backwards. Instinct would tell you to put the finished side of the fastener on the finished side of the top. But we're actually going to put them on the inside. Since our stud is pushing through to the inside, we want the catch to be on this side of the curtain. And we're going to see the inside. We won't see this side once it's pushed up against the bow leg. So set your curtains. Remember the pointed or the narrow side points towards the edge of the curtain. So we get those all set in place. And then we're going to flip it, and it's as easy as pressing your plate on. There's a concave contour to this plate. You want it, the edges to curl down towards the curtain so it gives a nice tight fit. And then you just simply fold those tabs over. Not difficult. I'm doing it one-handed. You can see the tabs get folded in. Don't fold them out. It could overextend the edge of the fastener and cause you to get a hole in your curtain. So just go ahead and gently fold those tabs down. Okay, we're starting to put the rear curtain on. Our fasteners lined up nicely. First thing I did was snap the curtain to the bow legs, and then the curtain really just falls into place after that. What I did was I pulled this side curtain as far forward as I could. I gave more slits, and I actually slit above this body line because this bubble kind of gives you extra area to stretch around, so you really need to cut your slits up above that so that when you do trim it, you don't end up with fullness because you were accommodating that line in the body. So once I got that fitted, you can see how the fullness is coming out of that side panel nicely. I am going to remove these staples and pull this wrinkle out just a little more. And so my beginning process here, I am using staples. They're a little easier to remove than tacks. but I've spaced them out, and I will be tacking in between my staples with a larger nail. So we set our sides, and then basically our seams fall into place. We can get a nice straight line here. I've checked, measured up to the window to make sure that my windows were nice and even with the body line. And now it's just a matter of working out this fullness. This side, you can see I haven't cut above that body line, so I'll be trimming that and pulling this fullness forward. And so the first thing I'm going to do is trim, and then I'm going to pull this point as far forward as I can without sucking it in too much. We want to leave that curvature following the body line of the car. Okay, we've got our rear curtain on, and we're starting to put the trim along the bottom of the rear curtain. We start with a welt cord that has a nice vinyl bead that runs right along the body of the car and kind of seals up any gap in material. So you want to put that layer on first, and you'll end up stapling right on the edge of that vinyl trim. And you'll notice underneath, peeking out here, are nail heads. Before I started that vinyl trim, I went over this with number 14 nails. The wood on this seemed a little dry and soft, so I am putting some larger nails than I usually do. And here you can see I also folded a piece of trim in half and nailed through that, so there's a little more integrity to the curtain. In this case, the rear seat was already upholstered, and for this body tack rail to be replaced, the whole rear seat would have to come out. So we've upgraded our nail size. So we're running that first line of bead, and then covering all of this in the end will be Hightem welt. And I'm going on to the main top deck, and our first points that we want to anchor are the corners. You want those to overlap exactly with your rear curtain, and then our trim will come down, and a welt tip will finish that off. But this, we're going to start on one side, and then we stretch the top over to the other and anchored it, and it did take some stretch to get it here. But the main thing you want to check is that you're meeting and that you're not leaving a big ripple here. So it's kind of a down and backward stretch. If we stretched it and brought this corner up, which would be easier to do because you don't have to stretch it, we would have a big flap in the wind here. So in order to get rid of that, you need to stretch down and backwards to get that anchored. Okay, we're finishing our main top deck. We've pulled the main top deck forward, and you want to start out by pulling on this seam and stretch out all the fullness that you can right on that seam and anchor that point first, and then do the same on the other side, and make sure that your curtain is centered, that your overhang on the side is equal. And then once you're happy with the placement of the curtain, you want to just make sure you're pulling as tight as you can without collapsing your straps inside the car. You don't want those to start sagging. So you're just pulling until there's some tension, but not overstretching. Then once you've nailed off your front curtain, you're going to trim from this seam right along your staples back to about a third of the way onto the side of the bow. And that opens this piece up. But don't cut it off. We're going to wrap it up under the bow and stretch it forward and up. And we want that to come right at the point of that seam. And this just gives a nice finish to this edge of the bow. And anchor that real good. And then we're going to close all this gap up, and our trim will cover up all of this excess here. And then you can cut this off, and you've got a nice finished curvature to that bowl. We're making the V cut along the curvature of this bowl. And to do that, you just get up right next to the seam, just cut straight up, and then you're going to cut right below the staples. And you're going to go about 2/3 of the way down this side. And you can check it. Our goal is to bring this over and stretch it up under the bowl. So I think I'm going to go back a little more because there's a little bit of pocket there. And then we'll go ahead and trim this away. And now we're going to stretch that tab. Don't cut it off completely. We're going to stretch it up and under. This is what will give you a nice tight line here down the side panel. And then we're going to anchor it off here. And then our trim is going to come and finish all of this slit here. So now our final thing would be to cut this away, trim across the front bowl, and then run our binding, our Hightem welt, to finish that.